Hello, everyone. We're back. Welcome to the latest Pro Soccer Talk. The new Premier League season is almost here. Delighted to say I'm joined by Nicholas Mendola in Buffalo, New York, and Andy Edwards in Kansas City. Gents, it's been a long summer. A lot of other things going on, Euros, other tournaments, Copa America, the Olympics. But my goodness, it's good to have the Premier League back and good to see your smiling faces. Nick Mendola, how's your summer been and how excited are you about the Premier League season that is almost upon us?
Yeah, I'm super excited. I spent the last few weeks, as you know, with NBCOlympics.com, and I got my soccer fill there a little bit. I was super excited to see Christine Sinclair get a deserved gold medal, even if it was at the expense of the U.S. Richarlison was a lot of fun to watch, but nothing like seeing those practice shots come across your screen and the new guys in there, like the new Everton training kit and the new Man City, like Grealish in this like white with rainbow logo type stuff. I was like, all right, yeah, we're getting the style out. We're ready for some games. So I'm super pumped.
Andy, what about you, my friend?
Well, you said it was a long summer. I would disagree with that. It was busy. It felt like it should have been long, but we packed a lot of stuff into a very short period of time since the end of the Premier League season. We had the Euros, we had the Gold Cup, we had the Lionel Messi saga that has lasted the last week or so, and I managed to squeeze in a few rounds of golf in between all of that. So I have zero complaints whatsoever about my summer.
That's always a good thing. A few rounds of golf is always a good thing. And I've pretty much forgotten England lost to Italy on penalty kicks in Euros until we brought that up then. So that's a good summer in my books. But gents, let's get into this week. But first and foremost, let's have a beer transatlantically. So here's to a great season, great summer. And let's get Pro Soccer Talk. The first one, the 2021-22 season kicked off. Okay, focusing on the Premier League. Let's preview the season. I've asked you to send me your predictions for the table 1 to 20. Some very interesting predictions in there. Let's have a look at the major storylines. Who's looking good? Which teams have spent big and wisely? And there's some really big players who've arrived in the Premier League this offseason. So how are we feeling, Nick, when you look at sort of the teams 1 through 20? Is there anybody that you think, you know what, they've had a really good summer and they are best equipped heading into this new season?
Yeah, best equipped is so weird because I'm still not sure. And this is one of the things I was super excited to talk to you guys about is where are we in terms of our belief in how important a center forward is? Because that is the big question for me at the two teams that I believe I might have 1 and 2 at the table. I can't remember, but the two Manchester teams, right? I love Sancho going to Manchester United, right? Is Edison Cavani going to do the thing? Is it going to be Mason Greenwood or Rashford? And then I love Grealish as a playmaker. I like him as almost a second Kevin De Bruyne. But who are they feeding? Is it De Bruyne? And what's going to happen with Harry Kane? So I almost felt like, can we have one more week? Can we have one more week to make these predictions? Can we see these teams one time? But that wouldn't be fair, would it, Joe?
It wouldn't be. That's not the way it works, mate. We could wait until a few more weeks from now and give another prediction. Maybe we should do it like mid-season. I feel like maybe we could do that, maybe. But it's always fun to see how we kind of see the transfer moves, what we like of new managers coming into the league, and how we think some teams have regressed, Andy. So there's a lot to kind of comes into play there. But maybe let's talk through your selections in the preseason here, because you've gone for, I would say a surprise pick for title winners. Would you want to talk through that selection of, you reveal who you've picked to win the Premier League this season.
Yeah, let's just go into it because there are 4 good teams in the Premier League this season. And what you're going to hear all year is it's a 4-horse title race. And it should be, cross our fingers with the tiniest bit of luck, it should be absolutely fantastic to watch for 38 weeks, hoping for all of that. But I look at these 4 teams and there are some very good teams. I don't think there is really a perfect team or a fully built out team as of yet, except for maybe one. And that would be my title prediction. We'll go through them here real quick. Manchester City, as Nick alluded to, center forward. Are they going to play one? Do they need to play one? Are they going to sign one? Are they going to get Harry Kane? Sergio Aguero is gone. Are they going to play false 9? There's a lot of questions about that. And that position has been an issue for them for a couple of seasons. Obviously, they won the title last year without having anyone play that position. Liverpool, I've got the same worry with Bobby Firmino. I know he had a good summer going and playing with Brazil, but I can't forget what happened last summer with Liverpool. And so is he going to be able to refine some of the form that he had previously, or is that just kind of the player who he is now? Manchester United, they need a Nemanja Matic replacement about 2 or 3 years ago, really, really badly. And at some point, he's 33 years old right now. He's going to hit a point where he's just not available every single game like he has been the last few years. And I think that's a bit of an oversight. I know it's, there's been a lot of money spent on Jadon Sancho and Rafael Varane, and that's fixed a couple of problematic areas for them as well. But that's still a really big one. And I don't know how much it matters that you improve the defense if you don't improve the defensive midfield spot in front of them. And so that leaves Chelsea. I just look at this team and I see probably the best starting 11 in the league, because you can look at it, all 11 spots, and say, I know who's going to start there. They're a quality player. I think they have the most depth of any team in the Premier League as well. They're about to add Romelu Lukaku. By the time you see this, they might have already done so. They just won the UEFA Champions League a few months ago. So it's a team that has been together, that has had success together. They've got a manager that clearly they're playing for. I just look at all the signs pointing towards Chelsea and saying, they're the most complete team. They're the team I have the least questions about, I guess, in the end. And so tell me if I am way off base after kind of making the case there, because I know you were a little surprised that I went with Chelsea in the first place. Does that case stand up, though?
Well, I kind of set it up there that I was really surprised, but I picked Chelsea to win it too. So I don't quite know why I did that. Nick, you picked Manchester City to repeat, and I can see where you're going with that. Obviously, maybe depends on Harry Kane. We're going to talk about that later in the show, about if he does finally turn up from Tottenham. It's looking a bit unlikely right now, you'd have to say, with the money they spent on Jack Grealish. But for Chelsea, I'm with you, Andy. Lukaku, as you said, probably the deal will get done just before the new season starts. That is their biggest need. They were creating so many chances last year. Nick, the expected goals guru, Chelsea was second, I think, in the Premier League last year in terms of expected goals. Just scraped fourth place, and we all saw how much Werner and Havertz and others struggled to put the ball in the back of the net. But with the solid defensive foundation, Kante and Jorginho in midfield, and then if you add Lukaku to the mix there, ahead of those attacking midfielders, as long as they all stay fit, I think Chelsea's squad depth as well is incredible. Yeah. And we all saw what Tuchel did in the second half of last season. I find it hard to look past them. Nick Mendola, make the case for Manchester City. Why should they be favourites in your opinion?
So my only question with City is the motivation. That it seems like there's a vibe that how do they rally the troops? How do they find that same intensity that we saw when it looked like they had a legitimate chance at a quadruple last year? So that's my big question. Personnel-wise, just not worried. And we talked, I remember Mikel Arteta, I think I've referenced it a lot. He was talking around Christmas time last year about how Pep always wanted to play without a striker. And I think that that's a little bit overblown. But what you see now with De Bruyne, what you see now with Foden, Jack Grealish, these are players who are impactful in any position across the field, coming from any angle, bringing that skill set. Don't be surprised when you see a lot of, what we've seen with Pulisic over the years at Chelsea and Dortmund, where he's on the left at one point and the right at one point and center at one point. And I do think it's going to take some time for Grealish to get into that mold. But for him to have the numbers that he had at Aston Villa, and I don't think their surrounding cast was poor, but let's be honest, it's obviously upgraded here. I think about his progressive passes, the way he carries the ball, his creativity, and, you get a Kane in there, and obviously it's going to be much, much better. But they're going to create so much between Foden and him. And you went from having David Silva as this guy who is absolutely wonderful and a visionary, and how many of them are there in the league, to having three guys like that on one team. So I really think they're going to still be dynamite.
Yeah, I mean, you got Gabriel Jesus, Raheem Sterling, Foden, Mahrez, Bernardo Silva, Grealish, De Bruyne were probably playing a false nine. So many attacking players. I just worry that they may not be able to keep all those players happy in that system. Right. Pep does rotate very well, but I don't know. It's a different season this time. You haven't quite got the congested nature of the season that we had the last campaign. So those relationships and having it slightly longer between games, you need those partnerships to kind of build throughout the season a bit more, I would say. But hey, that's who we're picking for the title here. When we look down some of the other predictions, are there a few teams we should be concerned about? Andy Edwards, I'm looking at some of your predictions there. Looks like Arsenal, maybe we're not expecting another big season for the Gunners, and maybe if they have a bad start and they have a tough schedule to start with, should we be concerned about Mikel Arteta and his future with the Gunners?
He's definitely in the conversation for first manager to go this season. I think, they finished well down the very end of the stretch of last season, but it was such a disjointed season from them. There was no consistency. Nothing ever really felt like it came together cohesively for that team. And so they've not had a lot of time together this summer. They're not going to have European competition this season for the first time in over 20 years. And so maybe that will be a little bit of a help to them. They can focus their energy and their time a little bit more on the league and improve upon where they finished last season. I don't know. They're all the questions I had about Arsenal a year ago when we did our first episode of this, I have all the same questions about that team still now.
That's very true. And I think that's the main problem, right? They've been trying to move players on all summer long. They can't quite do that to freshen up the squad as they would like to do. So tough start for Arsenal, you think, and you kind of worry for Arteta a little bit. Obviously, you can check out our full predictions over at Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com. 1 to 20, picking the top 4, top 6, 3 teams that are going to go down. Nick, let's move on to that. The relegation situation is quite interesting this season because Brentford, Norwich City, and Watford have come up. And you could argue that Norwich and Brentford have made some really nice moves in the transfer market and can maybe just have some of the other pack of teams that have finished last season not so well, looking over their shoulders. I'm thinking about, I'm not going to say which teams yet, but any surprises for you in terms of the relegation situation with some established Premier League teams maybe regressing over the summer?
Joe, I can't believe I'm doing it again. I can't believe I'm putting Burnley in the bottom 3. They have defied me for a half decade. But I look at that team, I look at what we saw from them last year, and I think, all right, Ben Mee and James Tarkowski, cool. Chris Wood, yeah. Some interesting plays in the midfield. And then I think to myself, are they really going to do it again? Because the only team of the bottom of the new 3 that I have ticketed for almost automatic struggles is Watford, especially if they don't start well, because if they don't start well, we know they're firing their coach. It's what they do. I think that Daniel Farke is too smart for to make the same mistakes twice. Now, does that mean they have the quality? I don't know, but I like some of the guys they brought in. And Brentford, to me, is a team, maybe call it like a little bit of a JV vibe on that Leeds train when they came up, which is they're built to be both pragmatic and adventurous, if that makes sense. So I worry about 2 teams near and dear to our heart. I worry about Southampton. I worry about Newcastle. And I'm going to add in my darlings, Brighton and Hove Albion, because I still don't know that they have a finisher. I predict them to finish well, but that's a lot of blinders on there. So I think there are 3 classes here. I think there's a clear mid class. I think there's a clear upper class. And I think there's a clear bottom, let's call it 6. And that worries me as someone who wants Newcastle to do way better than they should.
I'm with you on that. Newcastle, Southampton, and Brighton. I've also tipped Wolves not to do too well this season and be right down there because I think Raul Jimenez, it just all depends on how he comes back and if he's firing. Obviously, change the manager. There's a lot of players there that Nuno Espirito Santo played a big role in getting them to Wolves. How they're going to react to a new manager coming in, I don't quite know that situation. But Andy, you have another established Premier League team down on the bottom 3. You want to explain that pick and maybe, it's not going to be good for Patrick Vieira, is it?
There comes a point in the time where a team is in the Premier League where it's just time. It's just time for you to go. If you've not reinvented yourself at the highest level and pushed yourself on and simply been kind of happy to be there 12th, 13th, 14th for a lot of seasons, maybe push towards 11th or 10th a couple of times. But if you're not really still trying to push forward, you're going backwards in the Premier League. And that's what I've seen from Crystal Palace the last couple of seasons. They've spent a couple seasons down very close to the relegation zone. Half of the squad from last season is gone. It needed to happen because they were all well over 30 years old, and it was the oldest squad in the Premier League. But they've not brought in a ton of quality to replace those players. And they've got a new manager who's never managed in the Premier League. He's got about a year and a half at a very high level as a manager. I just have a lot of questions about Crystal Palace. So I have them 19th in my predictions. I have Watford bottom, and then I also have Southampton in there at 18th. And I will tell Nick, I did the same thing with Burnley for about 2 hours yesterday when it came time to put together my predictions and send them to Joe. I had Burnley sitting 18th the entire time. And you know what I did 2 minutes before I sent them to him? I moved them to 17th because I couldn't do it. I just could not say Burnley will go down. I know the time comes for everybody, but it feels like Burnley is the one club that could just survive absolutely anything.
I did exactly the same thing. I moved them up to 16th at the last minute. So they're one of those teams that you just never bet against. And like we've all said, in that situation where it's going to be so tight at the bottom, you want experienced players, guys who've been in that situation before. Burnley have that. They haven't really brought anybody in this summer, which is the bigger problem. But yeah, there's, I think, some really big Premier League clubs, as we mentioned, Wolves, Southampton, Crystal Palace, Newcastle, Brighton, that are established now and are going to be looking over their shoulders this season. There's a relegation situation. I just want to point out one team, although they've been kind of had turmoil around them all summer. I like what Tottenham Hotspur has done in the transfer market. Nuno Espirito Santo, Andy's smiling, he didn't expect that. He's come in, and I think he is a manager that will be pragmatic, will be very solid. I think maybe he has some of the pieces now to be a bit better defensively. And even if they do lose Harry Kane to Man City late on in the transfer window, Heung-min Son's there. They have some other players lined up, and I think they'll be okay. Andy, I think they'll just be okay. But looking at some of the other big storylines, obviously Jack Grealish at City, Jadon Sancho and Rafael Varane at Manchester United, Lukaku coming in at Chelsea. Wow, I mean, there is some huge names arriving in the Premier League this summer. And gents, it's going to be so much fun to watch it week in, week out. So head over to Pro Soccer Talk and NBCSports.com. We have all the season preview material, predictions for the standings, looking at the best starting lineups for each team. There's superstars all over the place. And I think this is going to be one of the most competitive Premier Leagues from top to bottom, and all those different mini leagues. There's not a lot between these different sets of teams. So cannot wait for that. I'll be at Brentford Arsenal this weekend, Tottenham Man City as well. Full stadiums here in England now with different COVID restrictions. So it's going to be a crazy atmosphere after 18 months of pretty much nobody watching in the stands. So it really is a wild start to the Premier League season. And here at Pro Soccer Talk and NBCSports.com, these three lads will have you covered throughout all 380 games in this marathon of a season that will go through until May. Okay, gents, let's focus on another big storyline over the summer months. The US men's national team. What a summer it was for Greg Berhalter's side. They won the Gold Cup, won the Nations League. They have now broken into the top 10 of the FIFA World Rankings for the first time since 2006, which is an incredible achievement. And it just underlines, I think, the squad depth that now the US has all of a sudden, because they have two squads that have really showed up this summer. And Andy, I know you've been watching them closely in both competitions. What's your overall feeling about where the US is at right now? Because I don't think any of us were this positive about the US men's national team going into the summer, right? They've surprised all of us.
Yeah, I guess you have to ask, how much should winning 2 games with the A team and then winning a handful of games with the B team, a lot of players that you're not expecting to see at the World Cup, or let alone even World Cup qualifying coming up here in the next month, how excited should we get about that? And the word that you used that I think was perfect was depth. It proved that the U.S. men's national team has a player pool now that is where it needs to be to withstand an injury or a suspension to a star player or a couple of star players at the same time when games of consequence are being played. I'm talking about World Cup qualifying. So if Christian Pulisic goes down with an injury, if Weston McKennie or Tyler Adams goes down with an injury, we now have an entire tournament of evidence of multiple players that can come in and fill in those spots for a game or two and can get the U.S. men's national team over the line and into the World Cup. So it was really heartening to see the way that some of the young players, took that next step in their careers from the club level, and a number of them have already parlayed that into transfers over to Europe. Gianluca Busio, Sam Vines, and I know I'm forgetting one other that was on that Gold Cup team as well. But they're making moves and they're really progressing their careers quickly. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I want to even say I'm hopeful about what's to come over the next year with the U.S. men's national team. But, 2017 it wasn't that long ago. So it still feels pretty fresh.
Still pretty raw. But Nick, I mean, what does it mean for this group of players to be in the top 10 national teams in the world? Whatever you think about the FIFA World Rankings, this does have huge implications. There's some suggestions when you look at the numbers. A lot of young American players now, it will be easier for them to come to England, for example, and get a work permit in the Championship or the Premier League, just because the US are in the top 10 compared to being 11th to 20th, which is crazy, but that's the way these things work, and the way that certain countries rule work permits for football players. So what do you think about that? I mean, bigger picture, maybe the respect levels for American soccer. We've seen it growing in Europe with so many players coming from MLS and the likes of Pulisic and Reina ripping it up. I mean, this is, I don't want to say the heyday for American soccer, but this is a little bit uncharted territory, right?
It's close. It's very, very close to that. They just won a tournament that for a long time was one they really, really cared about, with house money, playing with house money. We looked at the roster when it came out and we said, all right, they're just going to look at some guys, and they may not even make the final. They may not, they may have trouble making it to the semifinal, and they won the thing. So I'm just so impressed. I think that credit maybe to the Federation for not freaking out at some points, because they didn't play anybody for a while. They let Berhalter make mistakes. A lot of people are now writing these kind of revisionist history stories about how this was the plan all along. I'm like, right. Tyler Adams as a right back. Like, Berhalter is a very good coach, a terrific tactical coach who needed to figure out what he does. It's not a worry for me. I think there will be a learning process, though, as he melds these two groups together in qualifiers. And the only big worry is, was this a long con from Mexico? Because I frankly can't believe that was the best that they could put out on that day. I know there are players they didn't use, but for me, it's still going to come down to the USA and Mexico. And if Jamaica gels, look out, they're the wild card here. But yes, the transfers are going to be great. The moves are going to be great. The attraction is great. And I can't wait to see more Pulisic, to be honest with you. I know that's crazy, but is he the transcendent star?
Yeah. Let me jump in real quick and say what a difference it makes to have an adult in charge of a team and an organization. And for any fans out there of a club or a national team or whatever, just ask yourself and think to yourself, honestly, say, is an adult in charge at my club or my national team? And you might be surprised at the answer, and it might make you rethink how you kind of view your club and what the expectation should be, coming from a season and a half of following very closely a club who did not have an adult in charge and now appears to have an adult in charge. The same with the U.S. men's national team for a time. It's great to have an adult in charge of other adults when there's things on the line. That's all I'm saying. That's
very true, and we can attest to that because Gene, our producer, is an adult and he looks after us, and this is the only reason we make sense from week to week. So he does a great job. So we all know how that is. But I'm just going to say this right now: what US players are we looking at to have a big season in Europe? Because you mentioned Pulisic there, Nick. Yeah, I feel like this is a big season for him at Chelsea with Lukaku coming in. One of those forward spots now has been taken away. Still, like, the jury's out, even in some of those big games last season at the end of the campaign. Yes, he showed up in the Champions League, but others were preferred in those attacking midfield roles. Aside from him, I'm looking at Josh Sargent signing for Norwich City. That's huge for the US. I still don't think they have a prolific striker up there, even though a few players did make a step forward this summer. And, Brendan Aronson, obviously, at RB Salzburg coming through as well, and a few other players like Busio coming to Serie A and Venezia. I think there's some really interesting moves, but Nick, I'm intrigued to see who you want to see step up into that next level of US talent, like you said, because Pulisic's right on the cusp, right?
Yeah, I wonder if it's being cute to go with the big names. Like, usually you get cute and you find, you dig deep and you find this guy who might. I'm looking at Pulisic at Chelsea. I'm looking at Weston McKennie with a new boss. And Juve, remember, this is the first time that they are not defending Scudetto winners in a decade. Tyler Adams, what's his role going to be at RB Leipzig?
We know that one. Jesse Marsh has said he's going to play almost exclusively the 6 this year, which is great for the national team.
It is great for the national team, but how does the adjustment happen with that talent around him? I think he'll get a longer leash, and I'm excited about that. I think he's an exceptional player, but you look at the guys who've left there over the next few years. So those are the big three names. I know what I'm getting in, and goalkeeper is probably the wild card, but I know what I'm getting in John Brooks. I still know he's, the number one guy. Are my stars transcendent? That's the question.
Yeah. At the most important time as well. You're asking your best players to be in good form going into the most important 14 games that they will play in a 4-year period. I don't think that's being too unreasonable.
Yeah.
I agree with you, and that sets us up nicely because World Cup qualifying, as well as they've done this summer, it was all about getting the squad together for World Cup qualifying, which starts in September. Got the schedule in front of me here. I mean, El Salvador away in September, followed up by Canada at home 3 days later, then Honduras away. In October, Jamaica at home, Panama away, Costa Rica at home, and then in November, Mexico at home and Jamaica away. So that couple of month period there is basically Bill Halter's job. Did he do a good one on the line for the last few years? Because that is what it all boils down to. It's great to be in the top 10, great to win the Gold Cup and the Nations League, of course. But as we head into World Cup qualifying, this is go time now. And there's a sense around the US national team and Pulisic and McKennie and Adams. This is the time to step up. We may not get another chance all as one group because they know what happened last time. And there's going to be some pressure on them, I think, especially in some of those home games there. And we saw, as Nick said, Jamaica have been showing up and have some really good talent in their squad in particular. So World Cup qualifying is going to be interesting. Any final thoughts on that period for the US men's national team and maybe how they can approach it? Open the floor to you guys.
Yeah, I like that Nick mentioned John Brooks. Feel good about him at center back. I'm still waiting to find out who's going to play alongside John Brooks. It's the only question I have about, if everybody is healthy, who starts a do or die World Cup qualifier tomorrow for the US men's national team. It could be 8 different guys at this point, and I don't know that any one of them is any better or any worse than any of the rest. Walker Zimmerman looked like he had an opportunity, I think, to stake his claim to that going into the Gold Cup. He got injured not long into the tournament. Miles Robinson looked good from that point on in the tournament, but I think of him more as the style of defender that he is. He would be a great player to take to a World Cup, to have on a 23-man roster for late game situations where it is all hands on deck, emergency defending going on, trying to hold on to a lead. He is so instinctive in the way that he defends and scrambles back, and the plays that he makes are incredible. He has lapses in other parts of the game, especially on the ball and in possession, and we know how much Berhalter prioritizes that. So I'm that's the one player, I guess, to go back to a previous question, that if somebody is to step up this season, I'm still waiting for that position. I think I've been saying that for 6 months that we've been doing these videos. I'm just waiting for someone in that one position. Then I can say I think we're going to the World Cup.
And Berhalter's made a really good point when we heard them talk in the Gold Cup with the 3 games in a window, that there's going to have to be more rotation, right? So when you start to worry about, well, is it Reggie Cannon or Anthony Robinson, and where is Dest playing? Well, they're all playing. They're all playing for a certain period of time. I guess my big question is, the resounding question with me is, I look at guys like, and I hate that they're going to be MLS guys coming out of my mouth because they're Europeans as well, but I look at Zardes, Areola, and Letget. Letget. Oh my God. Special Eject. I look at them and I think to myself, are we looking at guys that Berhalter sees as mainstays, or as guys who can? I love Giassi Zardes in the Wando role. I don't love him starting against Mexico. I love Giassi Zardes starting at El Salvador as a CONCACAF killer. Yeah. I don't love him. So those sort of, I don't even want to call them nuances because they're big questions, but that's where I worry. And I will add one name to the question. What is Chris Richards doing this year?
Yep. That's the big one.
He's getting a little older, and he's in a position where he could be that guy.
That's very true. That's very true. And focusing now on the US women's national team, Nick, I know you mentioned earlier you were with the Olympics team this summer. Obviously, they got a bronze medal. They were the favorites to win it all in Tokyo. Didn't quite work. The veteran team just looked a little bit, I don't know, just out of sorts. I think Megan Rapinoe said it best, that they didn't really have, that juice wasn't going from the start of the tournament. So what did you make of that? They won a medal. They rallied late in the tournament. But is this kind of the start of a new era, you think, for the US women's national team, with Carly Lloyd, Rapinoe, and so many others maybe right at the end of their time with the USA?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who wrote it. I think it might have been Caitlin Murray wrote something along the lines of that we have these victory tours with the U.S. team, and we have these long runs where we're celebrating the legends and they all have to play because that's the fans have played to see. And so they haven't rolled out the young kids. And I don't even think it's necessarily about young kids, because how often have we talked about whether the U.S. women's national team could roll out a B team and still do well at a tournament? So, I mean, I think what happened, this is really oversimplifying because it's not her fault, but Megan Rapinoe had a not great tournament. And maybe that's because she's a little bit older. And that was that. She wasn't the X factor. And that doesn't mean she's not good enough to play or start or shouldn't be in the picture moving forward. And it's hard because as her profile has risen as an icon in the world, period, point blank, no, we're talking about as a human being profile. She's 36 years old. And so there wasn't a lot there. I think Alex Morgan is still finding her groove. I don't think she's done it all. But again, how many of these players are above 30? Tobin Heath is above 30. Again, doesn't mean they're done, but who's sliding in there? Because their best players were Rose Lavelle and Julie Ertz and still Becky Sauerbrunn.
Yeah.
And then one more thing. When Alyssa Nair got hurt, nothing against Adie Franch, who's a very good goalkeeper, but you could tell that woman who had just stopped 3 penalties, one in the run of play, maybe was their security blanket a little bit.
Definitely. So interesting times ahead for the U.S. women's national team as she had a rebuild after the bronze medal in Tokyo. And for the U.S. men's national team, what a summer. 2 trophies in the cabinet, top 10 of the FIFA rankings, and now they're heading into World Cup qualifying in September, where they are pretty much the favorites, I think, to advance, maybe even above Mexico now, which I did not think we'd be saying a few months ago, gents. But here we are.
No one did.
That's where we're at. And at Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com, we'll keep you updated with all the latest news from around the U.S. national teams. Okay, gents, let's focus now on Premier League transfer news and transfer news around Europe. There's been a few big deals this summer so far. My question to you is, what's been the best deal of the summer so far in a transfer window? Because we've had Jadon Sancho and Rafael Varane coming into Manchester United, Jack Grealish going to Manchester City, Romelu Lukaku to Chelsea is just about done at the time of recording. Obviously, Lionel Messi, small matter of them moving to Paris Saint-Germain. And they had so many other good moves with Donnarumma. Who else? They signed basically everyone on a free
Sergio Ramos, Jorginho Wijnaldum, Hakimi as well. I don't think he was free, though.
So many good deals that there's too many to keep track of. But what's the best deal of the summer? Andy Edwards, you want to kick us off on this one? Because there's a lot to choose from and a lot of money has been spent in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can look past Messi without a fee being paid. If you just want to go blanket statement, I think that's pretty obvious. So I'll look for something a little bit deeper. Leicester, keep doing good business again and again and again. I know we've talked about this a few times, when we've done these videos, but they just keep doing business. And it really feels like Pat Sandaka is going to be the center forward that Kelechi Iheanacho was supposed to be. Not even when he went to Leicester, but when he was coming through at Manchester City, the hype that is behind this kid and what he has done already at a very high level in Europe to this point of his career, they just keep getting it right. And Boubakary Samare, who they brought over from Ligue 1 as well. I mean, they've sold a couple of players on in the last handful of years. They've had a couple of players kind of age into the latter portions of their career, and they just keep replacing them with players 8-10 years younger, just as good, much higher potential. So I just look at Leicester and say that is a football club that is run with the short term, the medium term, and the long term in mind at all times. And I think they deserve a ton of credit for not only the way that they have been able to build this squad in recent seasons, but they've held on to a lot of the really key players that you could look up and down their squad and say, is that player too good for Leicester? If they're not in the Champions League, they probably are, but they're still there. And so they've managed to put together a really good team. And as I'm talking, I'm kind of regret not putting them higher. I think in my predictions now, I have a little bit of regret.
Well, Nick, you want to help Andy out with that? Anybody else that's made big moves in the Premier League that maybe would push Leicester down a few places?
Well, so I'm struggling a little bit with the best deal because of some of the price tags affixed to this, right? I love Konate. I know it was a while ago, but yeah. I don't think any of us think Virgil van Dijk is now going to be a journeyman, right? But to have someone next to him who we know can be a force, I really like that move for them. The Sancho deal, I think maybe we're overlooking that a little because it took so long to happen and because it was in our minds and in our focus for such a long time. He is an electric player. He is a player who has put up numbers. Only really Messi and Mbappe are towering over him. If you really look at the numbers over the last couple of years, he has been very good regardless of whether he had Haaland or someone else. So I really think those were kind of special moves. I want to kind of highlight some little moves. I do love Daka. I do want Ensumare. I think Leicester, let's just Andy and I go with our mutual Leicester Transfer Appreciation Society a little bit longer. But I want to look to two moves. I like Brentford bringing Christopher from Celtic. I like the move of a low-cost move of Gibson going to Norwich because he didn't really get a chance at Burnley. He just wasn't the cat's meow, so to speak. And then the one name I'm really looking at, and I know this is going to sound silly to you guys, and Andy, we'll have Palace talk at some point, but Anderson. I think a lot of these teams have learned from what we saw when Fulham came up and had to address their center backs late. Anderson changed who Fulham was fundamentally. And if I know Joe's really high on the kid they got from Chelsea, if both of those guys work, all of a sudden we're looking at a team over there that can't sustain any injuries, by the way. But if they can get through, I think they have 4 London derbies to start this year. If they can get through that, I had them as a surprise team. So I like these little smart $15 to $20 million transfers that we're seeing with center backs.
Talking about that, Aston Villa, I think we have to applaud them for spending the Jack Grealish money well. Obviously, very disappointing that he went, but they probably didn't think that anybody was going to spend £100 million on him when they put that release clause in his contract. So they were obviously gutted to lose the club captain. You can almost tell that Grealish was a little bit in two minds still, even when he was playing for Manchester City in the first game about what he'd done. But you can't really say that he's made the bad decision there by going to Manchester City for work for Pep Guardiola and all the trophies they're surely going to win in the coming years. But to bring in Danny Ings, Bailey and Buendia and still have some money in the bank to strengthen their squad for one player, that seems very savvy from Aston Villa because they spread kind of Grealish's influence over 2 or 3 players. And that should mean that they're very solid and steady in mid-table and could potentially push for a top 6 place if they can stay solid at the back like they did for most of the last season. I actually think, and this is not like a revelation in terms of what I'm going to say here, but Lukaku to Chelsea is the best deal by far. Yeah. Because it's a lot of money, $135 million transfer fee. But when you think about, it looks like they're going to move Tammy Abraham on for maybe 30 to 40, and then you spread that cost over a few seasons. To me, that's the difference between Chelsea being a top 4 hopeful and a Champions League. I know they just won it, but a Champions League team that's going to be in the latter stages to all of a sudden they're in that handful of teams that you pretty much bet on are going to be in the Champions League semi-finals. And that's why Andy and I were so high on them earlier with our predictions that they're going to be right up there in the Premier League title bout. I think one player makes that much difference to Chelsea. And yes, it's a lot of money, but Lukaku, now looking at some of his stats, the last 2 seasons at Inter, 64 goals in 95 appearances. I mean, that's incredible. In a league, and obviously in Serie A, the numbers are 47 goals in 72 games, which is very, very good as well. And in a league that's quite defensive, he has ripped it to shreds in Italy. For Belgium, he's been brilliant. And I just feel like there's unfinished business. He's never actually scored a goal for Chelsea, would you believe or not? Because he was there, went out loan to West Brom and Everton. And I just think this is the perfect deal at the perfect time for Chelsea. The rest of their squad defensively in midfield finally got the goalkeeper situation sorted out. This is what they needed. It's expensive, yes, but in terms of what they're going to get out of it, Lukaku was the best possible buy that they could have. They weren't going to be able to afford or spend money for Harry Kane. I don't think Tottenham would have sold him to Chelsea anyway. And then when it came to Erling Haaland, next summer is the time when he's going to move on anyway. But right here, right now, Chelsea moving for Lukaku, that makes the most sense for me of any transfer this summer. Okay, Andy, want to hear your thoughts on this? Harry Kane, we mentioned him there. What do we knew it was coming. He's still at Tottenham, heading into the first weekend of the season. Looks like he may actually play against Manchester City. What do we think of this? How's it been handled by Tottenham, by Kane, by Manchester City? There's $220 million, we believe, is the price tag on his head. He's got a lengthy contract, so he's probably not going to move, is he, this summer?
Yeah, is this his own segment now? Are we just gonna start an entire segment on Kane?
Sure.
There's enough material to do it. I'll sum it up shortly by saying this: Harry Kane has a specific value to Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, and that value is very high because he has 3 years remaining on his contract. He is an exceptional player at 28 years old who has scored a boatload of goals. He's on track to become club's all-time leading goal scorer, the Premier League's all-time leading goal scorer, England's all-time, everything that you can accomplish in a career as a top-flight footballer. Harry Kane is currently on pace. Now, the injury stuff is a little bit worrisome when you kind of project that long-term, but he's on pace to do all those things. Tottenham are not going to let Manchester City come in and pay, especially with Daniel Levy in charge, a penny less than what he is worth to them. And I think that's the thing that we forget a lot when we talk about, well, they overpaid for this player, they overpaid for that player, they got a good deal. Essentially what a transfer fee is you are replacing that player at the club that he is at. And so you are making that club whole again with financial resources to then go out and replace that player, to bring in someone new, to hopefully, in theory, produce at the same level. For Tottenham to go out and buy a player to produce at the same level of Harry Kane, there probably isn't one in the world. So it is already difficult to put what is he worth, a price tag on him at that point. And then you throw in the ties as an academy product, somebody that's been at the club since he was a kid, and everything else that's involved. And I will just say, I think it's been handled. I don't think it could have been handled worse on the part of Harry Kane and his representation, and also Manchester City and the way they have not covered themselves in glory, the way that they have gone about this entire thing. So I think there's a lot of fault to go around. And if you can believe this, I'm actually going to say it. The person that is without fault in this entire situation is Daniel Levy. Congratulations, Daniel.
You did it.
I'm just a little bit stunned by that statement, to be honest.
He's handled it perfectly. Everybody else has gotten this wrong from the beginning. If Kane wanted to go, there was a number that Manchester City had to hit. They clearly cannot hit that at this point, especially after paying Jack Grealish £100 million for Jack Grealish. It would be insulting to Tottenham if Manchester City came in and said, here's the same number that we just paid for Jack Grealish. We'd like Harry Kane for that. That would be insulting to Tottenham.
And I just want to touch on the Lionel Messi situation. Obviously, Barcelona, that unraveled very quickly, thought he was going to re-sign. Financially, they weren't able to with the La Liga rules. They're already way over the salary cap. Seeing him cry on stage in a press conference with his family there, it was a lot. After 21 years at Barcelona, that is not the way you wanted his legendary career to end. Anybody, him, the club, the manager. Obviously, he's now gone to Paris Saint-Germain, which for me is a very boring transfer, very predictable. I'd love to have seen him come to the Premier League or maybe gone somewhere else in Europe that made more sense. But on the pitch, he's linking up with Mbappe and Neymar up top. His good friends, obviously, Paredes and Di Maria are obviously at PSG. Pochettino's the manager. It makes sense. He gets paid a lot of money for being there for a couple of years. He's probably going to be French champion. He's probably going to be right there or thereabouts in the Champions League. So it makes sense. But I would love to see him test himself at a Manchester City, at Man United, at Chelsea, somewhere in England. But I think Messi's, it took him by surprise. You can see that was genuine shock in his face that he's no longer a Barcelona player. And it still seems that somehow he may end up back there in a few years' time for maybe a season just to have a proper farewell. But the way that situation unraveled was crazy. And over at Pro Soccer Talk, there was news updates going on all the time from all angles. And that was an end to a very wild summer in terms of the transfer market. And we still have a few more weeks to go as well. So I'm looking at Liverpool. I'm looking at Tottenham. If Harry Kane leaves, how are they going to spend that money? And it's for Liverpool, they're looking around. Chelsea, even Arsenal, Manchester United, Tottenham even. These clubs around them are spending money this summer. And Liverpool brought in Konate right at the start, but they haven't done a lot else. And Van Dijk and Gomez come back from an injury, long-term injuries. They're like new signings, but I just feel that Liverpool are a bit light in central midfield, especially after losing Wijnaldum. They need to do something, I think, to just secure their top four status for this season.
Or maybe Naby Keita plays this year.
Maybe. But
it's 60 million 3 years ago. He just doesn't play.
You got him, Shaqiri, obviously Oxlade-Chamberlain, a lot of players there who've come in and just haven't played through injuries. So they need to do something, but we still have a few more weeks left. Obviously, transfer window in the Premier League shuts on August 31st. And here at Pro Soccer Talk and NBCSports.com, we'll keep you updated with all the latest news, reports, and transfers. throughout the rest of the summer. It's been a wild summer, as we said, a lot of money spent, a lot of big names coming to the Premier League. We love it. It's nearly done to the transfer window, and then we can make even crazier predictions once the 1st of September rolls around. Okay, gents, let's preview the first week of this new Premier League season. I can't believe we're quite here. Opening weekend of the campaign. Let's get straight into it. Big game of the weekend, Tottenham against Manchester City. Andy Edwards, what are you expecting from this? Because Man City, a lot of their players haven't been around for most of the preseason. Does that play into Tottenham's hands and their new manager, Nuno Espirito Santo?
Maybe. I mean, there's a few Tottenham players that haven't been around either, and players that have been there that haven't played. I'm talking Tanguy and Ndombele again. This is another manager that he's now finding some issues with in terms of like getting playing time and stuff. So maybe that's a little bit of a worrisome thing for Tottenham. It's going to be a hectic start to the season. That's the only word I can really think to describe it, because we're going to have 3 match weeks. Then we're going to go straight into an international break where we're going to fit in 3 games for international teams. We're going to come straight back and then into another international break where we do 3 games again when it's usually 2. So it's just going to be a lot of disjointedness early in the season. So I do look at these early first couple of week games, especially as opportunities for maybe some of the lesser teams, the smaller teams, the teams hoping to punch above their weight this season to maybe steal a few points off of some of the big sides. So I would back Tottenham more in this game, in this scenario, than I would at any other time that they were to play Manchester City or Chelsea or Liverpool or Manchester United, any of the big title contenders, any other point of the season. So I do think that they've got an opportunity. I'm curious to see what it's going to look like. I'll put a flag down here now. I don't think it's going to be as pragmatic or defensive looking as people seem to think it is with Nuno in charge. I think Nuno had what he had at Wolves. Nuno has had what he's had at other stops in his career, and he's always been pretty adaptive. It's not always looked like that, and that's just kind of what we're familiar with because it's in the Premier League, and so we've seen it. I think he will look at the squad and say, well, I've got a lot of great attacking players. I got a lot of great central midfielders who can get on the ball and make things happen. Try to use that while still being responsible defensively, but not 3 at the back with 2 wing backs that are just there to defend the way that it was at Wolves sometimes.
I like the fact he's had Skip and Højbjerg alongside each other a lot in preseason. I think that gives them a solid base and allows those fullbacks to push on, Reguilon, maybe Doherty if he's playing out there. That brings out the best in them. And it all depends on Kane, doesn't it? Of course, what he's going to do. He's going to play this weekend. But it is a good time to play Manchester City. They, of course, lost to Leicester in the Community Shield. Had a lot of young players out there on the pitch during the game. And they've had their number, Tottenham, in recent seasons. They beat Man City at home last season. And I just think they match up pretty well. And of course, we have to mention fans are back in Premier League stadiums as well. So with over 60,000 Spurs fans rallying, maybe trying to remind Harry Kane what he would be missing if he went elsewhere, that will be a great atmosphere. And I'm going to be at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Sunday. Cannot wait for that one and the atmosphere in and around the streets in North London. Something I know I've been looking forward to. Everyone here in England has been looking forward to getting back into stadiums and getting back into those routines as safely as possible. And the Premier League have done a really good job so far, being very clear about how it's going to work, what the restrictions are all about. So I'm intrigued to see how that works. I'm intrigued to see Brentford against Arsenal as well. I'm going to be there at the Brentford Community Stadium. Friday night kicks off the Premier League season, Brentford's first ever campaign in the Premier League. And Ivan Toney, all eyes are on him. Can he do it in the Premier League? He absolutely tore it up in the Championship last year as a top goal scorer. Love what Thomas Frank has done. Obviously, a very good attacking team. I think it's going to be another situation like Norwich a few seasons ago. Obviously, Bournemouth and Blackpool, if you can remember back that far, when they came into the Premier League, and they just went for it. I don't think Brentford are going to be sitting back against anybody. They're going to be exciting, attacking to watch, play to their strengths. Love the money ball, obviously, transfer moves they've been making through Danish football for a while now with their ownership, and they've always stayed true to that. And I'm intrigued to see what the atmosphere is going to be like. A tight little stadium, brand new stadium in West London, right next to the motorway. You got loads going on around you. And Arsenal, this is a very good time to play them at the start of the season. As we said, Mikel Arteta under some pressure, hasn't been able to shift on a few big name players for the Gunners, a few injuries to key players as well this summer. So I fancy an upset here for Brentford on their Premier League debut. I can see it, maybe even a draw, but I'm really excited for this one. And I'm really excited for Brentford to arrive in the Premier League, because they will be a story this season that we will focus on a lot. So, Andy, I know you're the resident Brentford expert. So any words on there. I can see a picture of Griffin Park, the old Griffin Park behind you on a trip you had to London many years ago. What are your thoughts on Brentford in the Premier League?
Yeah, it's like you say, it's going to be a fantastic story to follow all season long. And if you want to kind of look from the outside as a fan of another club at a club that is run by a lot of adults, as we've talked about this week already, and just very, very smartly and sharply and cleverly the way that they do everything, just have a look at Brentford. They play some good stuff on the field. They do even better stuff off the field in the way that they build the squad. Look at some of the alumni that have moved on from Brentford into the Premier League. You know them: Neil Mopai, Saeed Benrahma, Ollie Watkins, all in the last 3 years. There's a lot going on at Brentford. They're gonna really add something to the Premier League, and it's not every year I think that we can say that about newly promoted teams, but they are absolutely one of them that will.
Definitely. Nick Mendola, Manchester United against Leeds United is another big game. Obviously, huge derby match there between the Lancashire and Yorkshire rivals. At Old Trafford, what do you think about this one, mate? Because I know Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, we gave him some stick over the last few years, but second place last season. Do you think United can better that? But what about this game? Because the play in Leeds and Marcelo Bielsa, interesting one, right? Because United have had a lot of players away and have only just come back after a busy, busy summer.
Right, like you're not going to see Sancho or Varane for more than a few minutes. If even, I think can they finish higher than second? Sure, they can. Will they? I don't think so. I think it's still a bit of a too big of an ask. The midfield's a big question, as Andy said in an earlier segment. That said, they are missing some people this week, and Leeds still has Rafinha. They still have Calvin Phillips. I'm assuming he'll be ready to go. At least I haven't, unless I missed something. I think this is still a United game. I just don't expect the fireworks that maybe you'll expect when everybody's there. Should Bruno Fernandes be enough to get the job done along with Paul Pogba? Yes, I do think that'll be the case. I just don't know if we'll be seeing the 4-1s, which I think we'll see a lot this year for that team. I think we're going to see them score an awful lot of goals. My big question with Leeds, really why I struggle to put them anywhere on the table, is do we believe in Patrick Bamford? Do we believe that he can be their number one guy for a few seasons, because he was a big-time prospect not too long ago? Are we buying him? If we're buying him, then Leeds can contend for a Europa League place.
And it's that sophomore slump situation, right? In terms of teams now have played against them a couple of times last season. How can Bielsa mix it up? I'm sure he will. If anybody can, he will do that. But that very unique style of play that they have, can teams adapt to that? Have they learned about that? We see that often, don't we? If a team stays up in the Premier League after a very good first season, then they will slump a little bit and maybe teams will figure them out. But I think with Leeds United, they're a different kind of animal under Bielsa. Made some smart signings in the summer window, got some players back healthy. And like you said, Nick, it all depends on the service to Bamford. Him and Rafinha, they give him the X factor. Everything else is going on. They work so hard. But if those two are on fire again this season, then I think Leeds are looking at a solid top 10 finish. So other games to keep an eye on: Watford against Aston Villa. New look Aston Villa after Jack Grealish has left. Intrigued to see how they look with some of the new players there. Danny Ings is their main man, you say, now up top after his move from Southampton. Leicester City against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Again, new manager at Wolves, Bruno Lage. And obviously seeing how they react with Raul Jimenez back up top. That could be huge for them this season. And Leicester, as Andy mentioned, made some really smart moves in the off-season. And Norwich City, another new team back in the Premier League, the perennial yo-yo team, aren't they? Back and forward under Daniel Farke, but made some really good signings. US men's national team striker Josh Sargent, Milo Rashica, obviously Billy Gilmore on loan. Really like what Norwich have done in the off-season. Let's see if they can do better than last time in the Premier League. But Liverpool, with the defenders back, the way they finished last season, you have to think that Jurgen Klopp's side will try and put down a marker early in the season. So lots to look forward to in the opening weekend of the Premier League, lads. Over at Pro Soccer Talk at NBCSports.com, we'll have you covered with all the schedules, stream news, how to watch these games, plus reactions and our analysis. As we said, the marathon begins this weekend in August. It will end on the 22nd of May. So we've got some time to figure this out. But it is really, really good to have the Premier League back. So Nick and Andy, thanks so much for joining me for Pro Soccer Talk this week. Thanks everyone for watching. Enjoy the opening weekend, and we'll speak to you all very soon. Cheers, guys.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe. Make sure you subscribe to watch highlights all season long and join us at the weekend at 7 a.m. Eastern on NBCSN for Premier League mornings, and sign up for Peacock Premium, where you'll have access to 175 exclusive live games all season long.